Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you. Featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. We've had a guest on our show about 3 times, and the reason we do that is because this person, his name is Richard Skipper, is a very interesting man, and he's got a lot to tell you about. So I want to welcome to my show Richard Skipper.
Hello, Susan. Don't believe all the hype you read.
Well, you know
Thank
something.
you for that great introduction.
There you go. Now, Richard, you're known for your hands-on approach to individuals that you're working with. Now, explain that to our audience and tell our audience exactly what you do.
Well, that's a long... How much time do we have?
We have plenty of time.
Well, just to give you a very quick trajectory of my life and career, I am an actor. I came to New York when I was 18 years old. This August will be 37 years ago. So your audience can figure out the math and do it themselves. But I came to New York, and I pursued a career as an actor, and for a long, long time, I had a very successful career performing a lot of summer stock jobs. I was what they call a journeyman actor, meaning that I was working all the time. Was I making a living at it? I was able to survive on it, but I wasn't making enough to really sustain a real career. And then in the early 90s, my career went in a completely different direction, and my focus went into the world of cabaret. And I had some very successful shows that I performed all over the world, essentially. And that went on for 20 years. And then a few years ago, some life experiences happened that sent me going in another direction. And when we decided to go in another direction, I was trying to figure out what the next phase of my life would be. And the very interesting things, you know, I want to go back. I don't know if you are spiritual or mystical or any of that, but I had a few fortune tellers and soothsayers and those people telling me early on in my career that they felt that I was essentially a writer. And my career went in that direction. I started writing. I wrote a successful blog called Richard Skipper Celebrates, in which I celebrate artists and their bodies of, I call it worth, not work. Worth, what makes an artist an artist? How does an artist get from point A to point B and beyond? That's what I'm interested in. And I believe that we live in a culture in which everyone wants to put each other down, either for humor or otherwise. I'm not a fan of that on any level. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to be that person who celebrated artists. And then a few years ago, my career went in yet another direction when I was asked to publicize a few shows that were playing here in New York. And then people started reaching out to me to be their publicist, so I do that as well. And that takes us essentially to your question, what I mean by a hands-on approach.
Right.
As I've just described to your listeners and to you, I started out as an artist. So at the very core of my being, I'm an artist. Mm-hmm. And I think in the terms of an artist, but I also have the rare ability to use both sides of my brain, the artistic brain and the business brain. Mm-hmm. And I tie them together. And when I'm working with other artists, I love talent. I love entertainment.
Let me stop you for a second, Richard. You say you love talent. Now, what kind of talent do you love? I mean, there must be people who are an inspiration to you because when you hear them sing, when you hear them dance, when you hear them perform, they do something to you. Now, is there any particular person whom you have, I was about to say interview, but, you know, have kind of helped that?
Well, I'm going to tell you what I look for.
Go ahead.
And then you're going to be able to answer your own question.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
What I look for is someone whose primary goal is to entertain instead of making it about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that, I differentiate between entertainers and performers.
Mm-hmm.
A trained SEAL is a performer. A trained SEAL is on stage, it flaps its fins, it balances a ball on its nose, and it does it for one purpose and one purpose only.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what that purpose is?
Well, tell me.
To get a fish, to get a reward.
Right.
And they're not thinking. Do you think for a moment that a SEAL is thinking about your comfort level? Mm-hmm. Is a SEAL thinking about the people sitting in the back row of the theater? Is a SEAL that person on stage who makes eye contact with their audience? And the answer to that is no. An entertainer is someone who steps outside of the realm of what they're doing. And their goal is to take the audience on a journey for the next hour or 2 hours, 45 minutes, or whatever it is that you're spending time with that performer and or entertainer. I'm going to use my own terminology. And there are certain people throughout history that do that for me. Judy Garland does that for me. Carol Channing does that for me. Julie Budd does that for me. And I would say that every client that I work with does that for me. Some press people, they are hired to publicize the show. They create a press release. They get the press release out. And they are normally there opening night, which is essentially the press night. And then they don't always appear at all the other shows. With my clients, I go to all of their performances. And I won't even take a client if they have a show that's conflicting with one of my other clients. In the world of cabaret, just to describe this to your listeners out there, in the world of cabaret, it's like a concert, it's normally one performance here, maybe 2 or 3 performances there, and there's spot performances as opposed to doing a run of shows night after night after night. There are very few venues that afford the artist the luxury of doing that. The only one that I can think of off the top of my head in New York City that does that is the Carlisle. And their performers do 2 to 3 week runs, sometimes maybe 1 week, and it gives the audience various choices to see those people. Other artists, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to know which place, when you had performed before, which place really made the difference for you? Which place did you like to really perform in? Because every different stage or place has a different feel. And so when you're in a certain place, it kind of makes you feel intimate. It makes you feel like the audience is really listening. So is there a particular theater that you love working in?
Well, that's a very interesting question because when I was performing full time, I loved to travel. I loved being on the road. And each venue that I went into had its own it's like buying a sweater or a shirt or something. Each time you put that sweater or that shirt on, it may feel differently. It's going to feel differently than if you put on a pair of shorts. Let's face it. So each room has its own unique things. I will tell you this, and I've been very fortunate. I've appeared on stage at Carnegie Hall. I've appeared in major showrooms in Atlantic City and Las Vegas. I appeared on the Windstar ship, which is a very intimate small ship. The only places that I truly did not like performing were country clubs. And the reason I did not like country clubs, and it's funny, Carol Channing, to drop a name, once said to me, Richard, audiences are not there to see you. They're there to see each other. Think about that. And it didn't work. I mean, I could go out, I could get a good response from an audience, but the feel of what I was doing there, I hated it. I had an agent, God bless her, Ruth Stern, she's long gone, but she used to book me all the time in the country clubs. And one time I just called her up and I said, my fee is doubled. And because I hated it so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like if I'm going to do these, at least I'm going to be paid nicely for it.
Sure.
And there's just a mentality that goes with that I'm not a big fan of.
Yeah, I hear you. Now, Richard, you've worked with so many different people, and I want you to tell our audience which person that you appeared with was absolutely great to be with, because there are people who are put on the stage together, and they don't get along.
Mm-hmm.
But there must have been somebody very special whom you can tell our audience about.
Well, I was very fortunate. I had a very dear friend who unfortunately just passed away, Dana Lorge, and we had a very, and that brings up, a very interesting point. Dana and I, on stage together, we were magic. We won several awards together. Audiences loved to see us, and we got up. We didn't even have to rehearse because there was this synergy that happened between the two of us. And off stage, Dana and I remained friends till the very end. I saw her just a couple of days before she passed away. Mm-hmm. But we had our differences. And it wasn't that we didn't love each other. We were two very strong personalities with very strong wills, very strong ways of doing things. And when you look throughout history, there are so many of those people that, like Martin and Lewis, two phenomenal talents. But they, and on stage, when they appeared, they were magic. Off stage, there was just, and the interesting thing is, like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, I read once, they were friends, but they didn't socialize with one another.
Interesting. They
didn't have this life that went beyond the work that they did on film.
Mm-hmm. Now, that's an interesting point. When I spoke to some famous actors, singers, dancers, you think that they're so special and that they are concerned with the way people feel about them. But some of the people I met, some of the actors, the actresses, you name it, they were just like regular people.
That's the thing that's going to shock the pants off of all of your listeners. I'm starstruck. I still am. But sometimes there's an old adage where they say that you should never meet your idols,
right?
Because they become real people.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been very, very fortunate because I have been able to socialize and call those some of these biggest names in the business my friends, and I've seen them they have the same problems that you and I have.
Right.
Everybody has the same problems. And also, because I do a lot of interviews, as you know, with my blog, and I also do on-stage interviews as well, one of the things that I have learned, I don't care if you're a novice just starting out in the business or you have been in the business your entire lives, the same issues plague everybody. Mm-hmm. Where is my next job coming from?
Yeah.
Is the audience going to like me? What if they don't like me? What if the critics don't like me? You can invest all of your time and energy into creating something to have it blow up in smoke in one night.
Wow.
You go on stage and you can say, I have seen careers, and you know what I'm talking about. You've seen careers disappear because someone said something that happened to be the wrong thing at the wrong time. They didn't know that microphone was on. They didn't know that people overheard them in a restaurant. It's just a very slippery slope that everyone is walking in. And the unfortunate thing is that everyone is on such and nowadays, everybody's listening. Everybody's listening. I'm writing a book celebrating the women of Hello Dolly. And one night, when I first started working on this project, I was at a jazz club in New York, and I ran into a friend of mine. He said, what are you working on? And I told him in a private conversation. I get Google alerts for Hello Dolly, obviously, because I'm writing about it. And I got home that night, and there was a Google alert in my mail. Someone had written something about overhearing this conversation at the Iridium.
Oh, dear.
And this was a private conversation.
Yeah. So let's get to that, the book you're writing about.
Okay.
Now, what inspired you to write this? And is it something that you sit down and when you start to write, you just can't stop?
Well, it comes in like anything else. There are creative juices. There are days where you feel more creative, and there are other days. I'm sure that there are days where you wake up and you are raring to go, and then there are other days where you're just dragging you name it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so and that's part of, being a writer, being an actor, being a singer. You've got your good days, you've got your bad days. In terms of what caused me to do this, although I'm no longer performing as Carol, I performed, as you know, you and I have discussed this, as Carol Channing.
Yes. And
the greatest gift that came out of the years that I performed as Carol was the fact that Carol and I became friends. Mm-hmm. And Hello, Dolly actually happens to be my favorite musical. I never get tired of hearing that score. I've seen some amazing productions of that over the last few years, and I've seen some pretty mediocre versions. Mm-hmm. And I sat down and I started writing about these stories, and as I started interviewing people, it takes a village. And there are so many people in this business, and this is one of the biggest things that I think that young people starting out in the business don't realize, that there are so many people who have had amazing careers,
right. Yeah.
that the average person will never know their name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's another thing I wanted to ask you. Now, you're performing and you're writing all about some of the people from the past. Hello, Dolly and Carol Channing are very well known to the baby boomer generation, but young people today don't know any of those names. Now,
That's right.
Is there a way for you to write or to perform that would get them involved, make them kind of like that stuff? Because who else?
I often talk about this because it's the subject that I'm very interested in. This next generation, the millennials, and I know I'm going to offend a lot of people by what I'm about to say, but I find that this next generation that's coming along, and I know that I'm making a blanket statement, but the statistics show it, that there is a disconnect from their past. Mm-hmm. You and I talked about this earlier.
Yes.
There is, with people with tattoos and everything. Mm-hmm. I think they're not even thinking about who they're going to be 25, 30, 40, 50 years from now. Mm-hmm. And the choices that they make, posting things on Facebook and Twitter and social media without thinking about what they are posting.
Right.
And every single time you post something, you're adding another layer to this persona that the world has of you. Mm-hmm. And trust me, they're paying attention out there. Yeah. You may not think that something that you write is going to matter a day or two from now, but it may have repercussions further on down the line.
Yeah, but doesn't it behoove you, who love all of that music and want to keep it alive, doesn't it behoove you to try to do something so that young people and even older people will appreciate?
Oh, absolutely. When I first started out, I had a mentor. I think I may have even talked about her with you at one time. I had a mentor in my hometown. I grew up in a small farming area in South Carolina, and I was lucky enough to know who these people were of the previous generations because of the time that I grew up in. I grew up in an era when there were three networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC. We didn't even have PBS where I was. And those three networks in my hometown, they were Channel 3, Channel 6, and Channel 13, I still remember. And those three networks vied for the largest demographic that they could possibly get. And therefore, the artists of my generation, like Captain and Tennille, I just interviewed Tony Tennille, and they did a variety show.
Sure.
And they would have George Birnes on the show, they would have the older stars on their show, and then they would have from different generations. And people didn't live with a remote control in their hands. Mm-hmm. So they would sit there as a family, and you could sit there not worried about something embarrassing coming up on the screen or something that was going to offend somebody in the group. It was all entertainment. Mm-hmm. And it goes back to this days of vaudeville. But getting back to this mentor that I had, she said to me that when you step out on stage, you are carrying the mantle of all the great artists that have gone before you. Yeah. And when I was studying with her, and she would mention names, and like if she mentioned Helen Hayes, for example, mm-hmm. and if she would say, well, who was Helen Hayes? What was her claim to fame? What did she do? And if I didn't know, mm-hmm. she would say, our lesson is over for today.
Oh boy!
And I didn't have the luxury of Google. I would go home and I would go to the library and I would look in the index of every theater book to find out who these people were. So I came to New York with a strong sense of what my past, the history of the theater and who these people were. There is absolutely no excuse in today's world of Google. Mm-hmm. If someone says to me, well, I don't know who that is, right. I say, go and look it up.
Yeah. And it's so easy, right?
And I'll tell you a very interesting story. Mm-hmm. Just a couple of years ago, there was another revival of Annie on Broadway. Mm-hmm. And then the reason that this most recent movie was made, which was a disaster, because you took these iconic characters that belonged in the Depression and you tried to give a different spin to it and place it in today's world. Mm-hmm. And they tried to create something that, in my opinion, was offensive to all the creators that had created the original. Mm. And it's very interesting because the director of this movie said that the reason that he wanted to do this is because when he was sitting in the theater and one of the songs is, we'd like to thank you, Mr. Hoover. Remember, it's the Depression. Mm-hmm. He said that he realized that the people around him didn't know who Herbert Hoover was.
Right.
And because they didn't know who Herbert Hoover was, he felt that it needed to be updated. And that is a mistake. It's a huge mistake. If you don't know who these people are, if I hear a name, if I'm watching a movie or something and I don't recognize that person, I go and look it up.
Sure.
I want to know what else have they done that I can see them in. How can I, and in today's world of easy technology, ask Siri if you're too lazy to look it up. Go on your iPhones, look up these people, go on your computer. Now we don't have just 3 networks. We have thousands of networks.
Right.
And I've often said that I think that the biggest mistake that happened to the entertainment industry, and please forgive me to all those people who are fans, mm-hmm. I think the biggest mistake is MTV.
Right.
And the reason I believe that is because entire generations of kids grew up only listening to a niche market that was given to them. Mm-hmm. And they, unfortunately, don't know about the past of the people that have preceded them.
Well, do you blame that on the educational system? Because it sounds like they're doing something wrong. The educational system should teach kids their civics. They should teach kids about history. And they should also introduce them to the arts. But that's one of the biggest problems that we're dealing with now, Richard, is that they're cutting out the arts.
Are the first thing to be cut.
Yep. And that's one of the reasons that kids don't know and don't understand how important it is to learn about the arts.
Well, Harry Collegian, who is Carol Channing's husband, he said to me once, kids will not know the difference between a xylophone and a microphone if they're not introduced to it.
Terrible.
You have to introduce them.
Yeah.
And the thing is that you're absolutely right. When we are cutting funding for the arts in school, when kids are working on a play, for example, I know that there are people out there who may think, well, this is a frivolous pastime or something. They are learning a sense of community. They're learning the sense of what it is to work as a cohesive team, to work together towards creating an artistic outcome. They learn, believe it or not, at class systems, because every kid cannot be on the stage.
That's right.
In a show. And there's hopefully a democracy when it comes to who gets picked to be on the stage and who doesn't. Just doing lights, or doing, pulling the curtains, or moving a set on stage. Every single one of those things are important. Right. In terms of, can you imagine going to a Broadway show and all of the other elements other than the actors not being in place?
Oh, terrible. Awful. Now, I want to tell you something that's going on in my community. It's called the Alchemy. And the reason I'm telling you about the Alchemy is that the Alchemy is a place where everybody's invited to do something on the stage. If you're a singer, a songwriter, if you like to do rap, if you like to do Broadway music, anything. And it's a great mix of people who come to the Alchemy. It's a wonderful way for young people and older people to kind of get together and to show each other what they do best. So I always say to everybody, don't be discouraged about what's going on, because there are people like this. Well, his name is Ian Caven, who's about 40 years old, and he invites everyone to come and enjoy the Alchemy. And one of the things, Richard, that I saw is that when young people hear older people sing, they start singing with them. And when the younger people sing or do poetry or something like that, the older people appreciate it too. So maybe that's one of the things that we need to encourage. We need to...
Well, when you look at some of our pop stars, Lady Gaga being the prime example, who keeps going back to the classics. Think about all the songs that you and I grew up with.
Right.
And think about the numbers of covers. One of my favorite songs is Moon River. And Moon River has been recorded by hundreds of different people.
Sure.
The songs that are being written today are not going to have the same kind of history. They're just not.
No.
Because they're not written for that. It's this whole sense of it's just in the moment. Yeah. In the moment. And, I'll tell you a funny story. Years ago, I went to a revival house in New York, and they were showing The Bandwagon and Singing in the Rain, and two of my favorite movies. And so I go to see these two movies, and they made an announcement between the two movies that Betty Comden and Adolph Green were going to come out and speak to the audience. And, of course, they wrote the book for both of those, the scripts for those films. And Betty Comden and Adolph Green came out. This person stood up in the audience and said, when I watched The Bandwagon, it's still, today, it could, still work today and everything. How did you create something that it was going to last 25, 30, 40, 50 years later? And Betty Compton said, as a joke, well, one day we woke up and and said, let's create something that's going to last 50 years.
She just woke up and did that.
Yes, you never know what's going to hit with the public, what's not going to hit with the public. But so many things are so caught up in this, I don't even know what to describe it. It's like a temporary mishigas.
Yeah.
That's being fed to the general public.
Well, the problem I see is that, again, there's so little education in the arts that unfortunately some of the people who are poor, they kind of feel that they want to tell their story. So what do they write? They write this rap that has awful words. I mean, it's words that kill, words that are dirty. I mean, they put it in because they say, well, this is our life now. But it doesn't have to be that way. Don't you agree?
No, when you think about the 1930s, for example, 90% of the movies and songs and things that came out of the 1930s was reflecting optimism.
Right.
Instead of the angst of what they were living day to day. People went to the theater and watched these glorious musicals because they wanted to escape what was going on in the world.
That's right.
And it's very interesting that the tides have somehow shifted, and this music that's being put out there, as you just said, is a reflection of the times that we live in. And that's a whole new show that you and I could do. But we live in a very angry and violent society.
Yeah.
And that's being reflected in so much of what's being put out there.
It's true. Now, I just a name that came to me because of the kind of music was Cole Porter. Now, Cole Porter in his music had words that kind of identified the fact that he thought about drugs, he thought about alcohol. And these are the things that really are not particularly good, but his music was amazing, absolutely amazing. And it would still stand if these young people would be, what's the word I want to use, if they would be exposed to it. But who's exposing them to that? No one.
That's true. You have to be exposed to it. And it's a shame. And I don't understand it. Again, I grew up in an era where I consider myself very lucky. We had music teachers that came to our school. We had drama in our high school. We had a drama class that I was in, and I had that outlet. I had a community theater that I was able to be a part of. Summer stock theaters. When I arrived in New York in 79, there were 175 operating what they called straw hat summer theaters. And right now, there are 24 theaters around the country.
Wow.
People are not going out and experiencing live entertainment the way that it was being that people were doing it even 25 years ago.
Well, that's because of the technology.
The technology has people don't listen to music the way that they used to. Again, MTV changed the way that people looked at music or listened to music. It was the visual that had to go with it, and then I used to love to go to record stores and go through the record bins, and the artwork that was on album covers and the albums themselves, and putting an LP on and listening to the entire score or the arc of the music as the artist intended it to be listened to. That's missing.
Yes. Well, we're almost at the end of the show, Richard.
Well, we need to talk about what I wanted to talk about.
That's right.
And that is that I am going to be debuting a new show here in New York on the 25th of May. And the show is a celebration of everything that I've learned up to this point in my life. And it's called Richard Skipper Celebrates. And the first show that we're doing is May 25th. And the premise of the show is that each day is meant to be celebrated, and that there are these incredible gems that are available to each and every one of us every day. Who was born on May 25th? Who passed away on May 25th? What special things happen on May 25th? And I'll tell you a very interesting story if you have a second. But my opening number is It's Today from Mame. And I chose that song because Jerry Herman tells a great story that he comes home one afternoon and his mother was dressed to the nines and she had canopies and hors d'oeuvres out. And he says, "Mom, what are we celebrating?" And she said, "It's today." And years later when he wrote Mame, he thought of that song. And I picked that song as my opening number, only to find out that 50 years ago, the night before, May 24th, 1966, Mame opened on Broadway.
Oh, my God.
So I've got these phenomenal entertainers that are joining me, and we are going to be celebrating Kitty Callan, who was born on May 25th, Beverly Sills, Frank Oz, Oprah Winfrey. Something happened with Oprah Winfrey on May 25th. Your listeners will have to come to New York to find out what it was. And then I'm going to have a mystery guest, like the old What's My Line? Mm-hmm. I'm going to have a mystery guest. And I'm not telling the audience who that mystery guest is going to be.
Oh, good.
And it could be someone from the world of jazz or Broadway or film or television. Again, you have to be there to find out. But each day, if you go to my website, which is richardskipper.com, ordering tickets are going very fast for this, which I'm excited about. Go on, there's a yellow starburst on my website. Go there, click on the starburst, and you'll be able to order your tickets there. Or if you have any questions or anything, feel free to contact me directly.
So once more, how do they get in touch with you, and what is your website?
richardskipper.com. My web address, my email address is richard@richardskipper.com. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm probably one of the most accessible people in the business.
Well, Richard Skipper has been my guest today, and Richard Skipper has a wonderful show coming up, and I think it's important for everybody to go to his website, which is richardskipper@richardskipper.com, because you're going to be absolutely surprised, because he has a surprise guest, and delighted by what you hear. So go to his show. I think it'll make a difference in your life. Thank you very much, Richard Skipper, for being on my show, and we'll do it again and again and again, because every time I interview
and thank you for being you. You're just the best. I just love you. You're
wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.